Hi, and welcome to the Free Exchange, hosted by the Hammond Institute for Free Enterprise here at Lindenwood University. I'm here today talking with the director of the Center for Economics and the Environment, as well as the director of the Hammond Institute itself, Howard Wall. Good morning, Howard.
Good morning.
So today we want to discuss a little bit about economics, in particular free market economics. Why don't you give us a sense of the different kind of economists one can be?
Well, so a free market economist is basically one who believes that the free market is at least usually better off at allocating resources than, say, a central planner or a government. Now that's at least usually, but there are different degrees of that. Some economists will think that it's always true, that the market will always determine exactly or the best allocation. Others, kind of more mainstream economists, have it mixed up a bit, where there's a role for government when there's a market failure, but then you have to be quite careful about how you determine whether the market will do better than what the government might do if it does intervene.
So those would be cases like externalities problems, public goods problems?
Yeah, so the economics usually says, well, there's perfect competition, and then there are market failures, where there's then a theoretical case for government intervention. So the case of externalities like pollution would be, well, the market wouldn't be able to deal with that, so the role for the government. But then it's still, even with externalities, you say, well, there's a market failure, but the government then steps in and tries to address it. The government has to be very careful, because there might be a government failure that's even worse than the market failure. Right,
they don't know how to allocate resources either. They don't have a price system to be relying on, so how are they going to make decisions?
Right, so you need an awful lot of information as a government to make a decision that matches what our models say is the optimal decision. And I think it's safe to say that governments don't have that information. There are different ways to do the best you can, but it's not going to be perfect. So then you add in that once you get the government involved, there's a political process, and then politics intervenes with what might be optimal economically.
Right.
And then you say,
that's not always a rational process.
Right.
Let's put it that way.
And then you say, well, given all that, maybe the market outcome is better than if the government does step in.
So even if it's not ideal, it could still be the lesser of two evils.
Right.
Yeah, lesser of two evils.
So among economists, mainstream economists, you say, well, it's kind of where that balance is. You can say, well, like for myself, I think from experience that we've seen that the government is more likely than not to make things worse. So you have to be extremely careful. And then when you do have the government intervene, it be very limited and simple, instead of trying to take over and make every detail. But then there are others who, because you can have a theoretical model that economists like to play with that say, oh, the government can do this, that, and the other, and then they believe that you can do it. There's more of a technocratic approach to the economy. But I don't believe that at all. I think it's very difficult to have enough information to do much better than what the market does.
Why do you think that most economists tend to have more confidence in the market than other sorts of academics?
Well, I think first of all, a lot of other academics don't kind of understand the market.
Okay.
I mean, you see market mechanisms, you look at it, you look at history of markets, and you see, things that happen. And there's, I don't know, I guess among economists there's more of an appreciation for just the basic things that you see that markets do. A lot of social scientists are more, I don't know, have a more of a tendency to want to see like a central plan. To fix something, you mean you have to have a bunch of rules and laws, and they can't imagine that unless you're actively seeking some outcome, then it will just happen naturally. And that's what economists say with the market, is that most of the really good outcomes will happen naturally without any government intervention. And if you're not thinking in that vein, then you might think the only way we can get anything good is for there be some plan
Right.
to figure out how to do it.
Yeah, it seems like a natural knee-jerk reaction to feel like, say you're looking at the business cycle, and so you see different recessions and depressions happening over time, and you think, look at this chaotic market operating, and don't we need to control this somehow? And you're assuming, first of all, that it's always market factors that are even causing these recessions and depressions, which may or may not be true, and it's government that can solve them.
Well, and
that's an easy mistake to make.
There's a tendency to, for people to not want change. So if you see fluctuations in the market, fluctuations in the market could be just the market working.
True.
And the market is just allocating resources, and the prices are just going to fluctuate. People might like certainty, right? So there's just a tendency, these fluctuations are bad. So an example of this is with, say, agricultural policy. So food prices have been fixed to various extents for decades. And the argument is always that one of the arguments is that, government step in to get rid of fluctuations in prices. We need stable prices.
Right.
But the stable prices are always really high.
Yeah.
So stable and low prices they don't like. So it's really, people sometimes don't like what the market does to them. So they want the government to step in and maybe reduce uncertainty. But the market is doing something. If you see prices changing, it's because the market's telling you something.
Yeah, and one of the things that I like to convey to my students is that prices are information.
Right.
And so I don't need to know why the price of this resource has gone up. I don't need to know the whole backstory as to why I need to change to a different resource. It'll just sort of force me to change to a different resource, thus conserving the original resource. And so all of that happens spontaneously in a way that doesn't require me having every detail.
Right, and that's the key, is that, the more I do economics, the less I think I know about how the economy works. Meaning that, again,
Socrates would love that.
Yeah, I get an appreciation for all the different things that are going on, and there's all the unintended consequences that you can't even imagine would happen.
Right.
But there are a lot of economists who, the more they do economics, the more confident they get in that they know what they're doing. I don't know, because they do harder math or something. But I think they're fooling themselves, and it's just not possible to really have enough information for even really, really smart people with pure of heart to step in and do better than the market, unless there are really stringent conditions for intervention, or at least being very careful about it.
And it's only because the system itself is so complex and varied. It's not because people are necessarily bad or bad intentioned or anything like that, right? And this is kind of one of the common mistakes that I think people make.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's imagine the economy. There's millions of people making decisions all the time, and then there are
and they have a lot of local information that they're basing those decisions on. What am I good at? What do I need? What do I want? What's happening with my life at the moment?
Yeah, so it's not possible for, if I'm a central planner or a government bureaucracy who wants to plan the economy, it needs to know everything about how to produce steel and every other good and all the intermediate goods all over in locations and everything like that, instead of each individual having their own bit of information and then conveying that information through prices.
Right.
So, some people, that's where people they can't imagine just the everyone having a little bit of information, but it all aggregating into an interaction of all the information. So some people will say, well, we have to have it planned, and I think they have it exactly backwards.
Yeah, and it takes a certain kind of mental self-discipline to keep reminding yourself that we don't solve this sort of problems in this sort of a system through central planning, because of course in our regular daily lives, if I'm running a household, for instance, I am the central planner. It's a little commune, right? And so I decide if we need to spend more on food or less on this, and because that's the way that I'm running my life everywhere else, I think it's very easy to slip into thinking, okay, let's do that in politics as well.
Yeah, and there are many economists who completely fool themselves that they build a very complex mathematical model of the economy or a market or anything like that, and they spend maybe months solving the math, so they think they've actually tackled something that is in any way as complicated as the actual economy, and they think that their model is actually the economy. And I think they're idiots for doing that. I mean, they're just deluding themselves that the difficulty in their math is some measure of how much understanding they have.
Is this the explanation for someone like Paul Krugman? Or do you have an explanation for someone like Paul Krugman?
Well, Paul Krugman actually has said that he got into economics after reading, I think it was Isaac Asimov's book, where there was some super being who was controlling things.
Oh,
and he went into
yes.
economics thinking it was a way to do that. So it wasn't.
Okay.
So some people go into economics perhaps to find the tools to understand so that they can make society more like they want it.
It kind of reminds me of sort of the heritage of neoconservatism, where you see people who really were, many of whom were Trotskyite socialists as young men, and became disabused, of their socialism just by seeing the outcome, for instance, in the USSR and places like that. But internally, there was still some love of the idea that if we could centrally plan everything, it would really be great and it would be efficient and rational.
Yeah.
And it's just that we can't do it, as opposed to the idea that there's something really beautiful and important about the fact that these things come about in a spontaneous way.
Well, so, economists have to be careful with this because it's kind of a tool, an analytical tool. We say, all right, say there's some benevolent dictator.
Yes.
And the benevolent dictator knows all and decides what to do. That means we can write our equations or move around our lines on our graphs as some benevolent dictator. But then we say, all right, well, now we have a model that says a benevolent dictator might be able to do something to resolve some market failure. But then you say, all right, now let's get rid of the benevolent dictator part.
Yeah.
But people don't make that leap. Often they stop and say, oh, we've shown that it's possible to intervene and that we should intervene.
Right.
And I don't know who they imagine the benevolent dictator is,
Yeah.
but they don't look around at what government has actually done.
Well, one of the things, I really like this point you're making about the models and sort of losing sight of the difference between the model and the reality. So I think when we come back from break, I'd like you just sort of for the layperson, can you explain the role of economic models and then how good economists do make the transition out of them?
Yep.
Does that sound good? Okay, please join us again after the break. Thank you.
Hey everybody! Heart disease affects 1 in every 3 women in America, but you can fight back. There's no time to lose. Mothers, sisters, daughters, families, and friends, it's time to shout louder, stand stronger, and demand change. Let's go!
To the Batmobile! Dang it.
To the invisible jet! Dang it. Together, we can put an end to heart disease. It's time to go red for women. I could use your help. Yeah! Learn more from the American Heart Association at www.goredforwomen.org.
Lindenwood University. It's where you can get an education steeped in 187 years of tradition, but in tune with the needs of students of today. Lindenwood is where the liberal arts thrive. It's where young people and working adults can prepare for the next great step in their lives. Lindenwood has more than 120 degree programs from which to choose, bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, and a doctoral degree in education. Lindenwood has tradition, a sprawling modern campus, a supportive faculty known for its one-on-one attention, and personal financial aid assistance to help new students and parents feel comfortable with their college choice. Lindenwood offers the best of the St. Louis region, with a college town experience in St. Charles, Missouri. Find out why thousands are choosing Lindenwood University. Find out today. You can reach us online at www.lindenwood.edu or call 636-949-4949.
You wanted to be a teacher when you were little, but things changed. Teaching didn't seem that cool anymore, so you decided to become something else. But what would your 12-year-old self say? Amazing things are happening in teaching, so it's time to put it back on your list. Don't try to convince yourself otherwise. You had it right the first time.
Hi, and welcome back to Free Exchange, hosted by the Hammond Institute here at Lindenwood University. We're continuing our conversation with Howard Wall about free market economics. And Howard, you were about to explain to us the role of modeling in the practice of economics, which seems to be useful but also cause problems. So can we talk about both of those phenomena?
Sure. So economists use models of how markets might work. And when you make a model that really simplifies things, you make some assumptions to try to eliminate issues that you don't want to deal with at this stage. So you might want to get at the core of one thing. And it's similar to like models that engineers might make of an airplane that they then put into a wind tunnel. something like that. It's a very simplified version. It's not the real thing.
Okay.
So you assume away or you get rid of a lot of factors so that you can focus on certain factors.
Is this sort of like getting an uncontrolled variable? Something like that?
Well, it's to control for lots of variables.
Right.
So you basically assume them away for the time being.
Yes.
Now, the problem that non-economists often make is to mix up the assumptions that economists make with beliefs. When an economist makes an assumption, they're making an assumption in terms of some model to simplify things. They don't actually believe that that's the way the world works. So the most common model is perfect competition. Now, perfect competition is that there are lots and lots of firms producing a good. You can say that they're all the same. They all have perfect information about all the prices. And there are even more firms that are potential entrants to the market who have the same technology as the existing firms, the same information.
There's no limits to them
and
entering.
There's no cost to them entering and so on. Now, the reason that we make those assumptions is to get rid of those problems, the problem of information, the problem of free entry for the time being, and focus on what markets would do if they were perfect, to try to get at what competition does, the role of competition. So you get competition within that, and then you show, well, market's clear and various great things happen. Now, that's a common model that economists then use to talk about things because you think it's a useful model for most situations, or many situations, even if you don't believe it's an accurate representation in every way.
I think it's frustrating for me, the model of perfect competition, a little bit, because of just even the language you just used strikes me as misleading because, for instance, you said we're getting rid of these problems, and yet some of the most interesting things that go on in the market are the solutions to those problems. So, for instance, the information problem is solved by media and advertising.
Well, that's why we have many different models. We have a model of perfect competition, and then there's a model of monopoly, there's models with imperfect information, there's models of duopoly, there's differentiated goods models. There's this whole bag of models that we can pull out, and often it's a case of which model we think fits in that situation, fits best in the situation.
Right, so corn, for instance, would probably be basically a perfect competition model. You can get in and out of it easily.
So we say, okay, with a free agricultural market, lots of entry and all of this, lots of producers, then we can use the perfect competition model.
Right.
If we're talking about automobiles, we use a different model. So, so there are different models.
But there might not be anything wrong with the fact, for instance, that computers